She had always loved music. Even as a small child, she would sit by the old upright piano in her home and run her fingers across the keys, making little melodies that nobody else could hear. The notes would flow from her hands in a way that felt natural, almost like breathing. Music was her world, her escape from the noise and chaos of everyday life, and it gave her a sense of freedom that nothing else could. Her parents often watched her with quiet admiration, but they never pushed her. They knew that forcing someone to love something never worked, and they were content to let her discover her passion on her own. She spent hours every day playing, learning from her own mistakes, and listening to the music of others, trying to understand the emotions hidden within each note. One afternoon, she received a call from the community center near her home. They were holding a small recital for local children, and they wanted her to participate. They explained that she would only need to play a simple tune, something easy and short, just to fill the time between speeches and awards. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The thought of performing in front of people was thrilling but also intimidating. Her mind immediately started to imagine all the possible ways she could mess up. What if she forgot the notes? What if she played the wrong rhythm? What if people laughed? But there was also a spark inside her, a small voice that whispered, "This is your chance to share what you love. You can do this." For days, she practiced the tune they had suggested. It was easy enough that she could play it with her eyes closed, but something about the simplicity made her restless. She wanted to do more, to add her own touch, to make it feel alive. Yet, she also worried that improvising might be seen as showing off or making a mistake. She spent hours sitting at the piano, going over the tune again and again, trying to decide whether she should stick to the script or trust her instincts. Every evening, she would play until her fingers ached, but she couldn't stop. Each time she played, she discovered something new, a small variation or a shift in tone that made the piece feel more her own. The day of the recital finally arrived. She woke up early, her stomach full of nervous butterflies. She put on her favorite dress, one that felt comfortable but also special, the kind of outfit that gave her confidence. Her parents smiled and reminded her that it wasn't about winning or impressing anyone. It was about sharing the music she loved. Their words gave her a sense of calm, but the tension in her chest remained. She arrived at the community center and saw the small crowd gathered, mostly parents, teachers, and local residents. The atmosphere was casual, but the presence of an audience still made her heart race. When it was her turn, she walked onto the small stage, feeling the smooth surface of the wooden floor beneath her shoes. She approached the piano, its polished surface reflecting the soft lights above. For a moment, she hesitated, her hands hovering above the keys. She could hear the quiet murmur of the audience, the shuffling of programs, and the occasional cough. It all felt overwhelming, like stepping into a new world. But then she took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was there. She wasn't performing to impress anyone. She was there to share her music, to let it speak for her. She sat down on the bench, adjusted the height, and placed her fingers on the keys. She closed her eyes for a brief second, imagining the melody flowing through her hands. The first note sounded soft and tentative. Her fingers moved carefully, following the tune she had practiced so many times. At first, it was simple, almost mechanical, but gradually, she felt herself relaxing into the rhythm. The butterflies in her stomach began to settle, replaced by a quiet excitement. She started to notice the audience, not as strangers judging her, but as people listening to the story she was telling through the piano. Each note became a word, each phrase a sentence, and soon the simple tune began to take on a life of its own. The more she played, the more confident she became. She allowed herself small improvisations, subtle changes in dynamics and timing, adding little flourishes that she had discovered during her private practice. Her hands moved with a new fluidity, and she felt the music lifting her, carrying her along in a wave of sound. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the transformation of the piece. What had started as a simple tune now felt alive, expressive, and full of emotion. Some people whispered to their neighbors, surprised by the depth and beauty coming from such a young performer. She remembered the words of her grandfather, who had passed away a few years earlier. He had always told her, "Play from your heart, not from the notes. Let the music speak for you." Those words resonated now more than ever. She closed her eyes, let go of her fear, and allowed her emotions to guide her fingers. Every note reflected her joy, her nervousness, her excitement, and her passion. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of herself, a voice that could reach beyond words. By the time she reached the end of the tune, she felt a surge of energy and satisfaction. She lifted her hands from the keys, and for a brief moment, there was complete silence. Then slowly the audience began to clap. First a few scattered claps, then more until the sound filled the room. She opened her eyes and saw smiling faces, some teary-eyed, others nodding in appreciation. The applause was warm and genuine, not just for her technical skill, but for the emotion and courage she had put into the performance. She felt a sense of pride, not from the recognition, but from knowing that she had shared a piece of herself through the music. After the recital, people came up to her, complimenting her performance and asking how long she had been playing. She answered humbly, explaining that she just loved the piano and practiced whenever she could. The audience was curious and encouraging, but what mattered most to her was the feeling of connection she had experienced through her music. She realized that performing wasn't just about being seen or praised. It was about touching others, even in small ways, with something she loved deeply. That day marked a turning point in her musical journey. She discovered a confidence she hadn't known she had, a sense of possibility that went beyond the notes on a page. The simple tune she had been asked to play had become more than just a task. It had become an opportunity to express herself fully and to experience the joy of sharing music with others. And as she walked home, her heart still fluttering from the experience, she knew that this was only the beginning of many more performances, many more moments where she could let her music speak for her. After her performance at the community recital, she felt a strange mix of excitement and doubt. While the audience had clapped warmly and some people had complimented her, there was still a small voice in her head questioning whether it was really enough. She wondered if she had truly expressed what she felt inside or if people had just been polite. Doubts like this had always accompanied her love for music. Even when she played at home alone, she would sometimes think that her music might never be good enough for anyone else. But deep down, she also knew that music was about more than approval. It was about emotion, connection, and the way each note could carry a part of her soul. The next few days were quiet. She practiced in her room, replaying the tune from the recital and exploring small variations. Her fingers knew the keys by memory, but her mind wandered to ideas about how to make each piece she played more alive, more expressive. Sometimes, she would stop and listen to her own music as if she were a stranger hearing it for the first time. She noticed the small details she had missed before, the subtle rise and fall of notes, the pauses that created tension, the way the soft keys could be just as powerful as the loud ones. Music was never static. It was alive, changing with every touch and every thought. One afternoon, she decided to visit the local music store. It was a small place, crowded with pianos, keyboards, and sheet music. The smell of polished wood and paper filled the air, comforting and inspiring at the same time. She loved wandering among the instruments, trying out different pianos and imagining what it would feel like to play on them in front of others. While she was testing the keys on an old upright piano, a shop assistant watched her quietly. "You play with a lot of feeling," he said softly. She smiled but felt shy. Compliments had never been her motivation. Yet hearing that someone noticed the emotion in her playing gave her a quiet boost of confidence. Back at home, she spent more time experimenting with her music. She tried combining the simple tune from the recital with melodies she had invented herself, creating a small, unique composition. Sometimes it sounded messy, but she didn't care. She wanted to feel every note, to let her emotions guide her fingers. When she made a mistake, she laughed at herself instead of feeling discouraged. These little experiments taught her more than any formal lesson ever could. She learned how to trust her instincts and listen to the music that came from within her rather than just following the notes on the page. Despite her progress, doubt lingered. She wondered what would happen if she were asked to perform again in front of a bigger audience. The memory of the recital had been thrilling, but it had also shown her how vulnerable she felt when others were watching. What if she froze? What if the music didn't come out the way she imagined? At times, these worries made her hesitant, but she realized that fear was part of the journey. Every musician, no matter how skilled, faced moments of doubt. The key was to push through, to let the music speak even when she felt uncertain. One evening, her parents suggested that she attend a small local piano competition. It wasn't a big event, just a gathering of young musicians, but it offered the chance to play in front of others again. She hesitated at first, afraid of failing or embarrassing herself. But her parents reminded her gently that competitions were not just about winning. They were about learning, growing, and sharing her music with people who would understand and appreciate it. Their encouragement helped her see the opportunity differently. Instead of fearing judgment, she began to think about the chance to express herself again, to let her music tell her story. Over the next few weeks, she practiced tirelessly. She focused not just on technique but on the feelings behind each note. She imagined the audience in her mind, listening not with judgment but with openness, experiencing the music as she did. Sometimes she would close her eyes and picture herself at the recital again, feeling the warmth of the applause and the quiet connection she had felt with the audience. These visualizations made her more comfortable with the idea of performing, helping her transform her nervous energy into excitement. The day of the competition arrived, and she felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. She entered the hall and saw the other young musicians preparing. Some were rehearsing quietly, while others seemed confident and relaxed. She felt a small pang of intimidation but reminded herself that everyone had their own journey. She was not there to compete with anyone else. She was there to share her music, to let it be heard and felt. She took a few deep breaths, feeling the familiar flutter in her stomach, and reminded herself that the music was hers to express. When it was her turn, she walked to the piano and sat down. She felt the smooth keys under her fingers and closed her eyes for a moment. The room was quiet, filled with people who had come to listen, and she felt the weight of the moment. But then, she remembered her grandfather's advice. Play from your heart. She began with the simple tune she had practiced, letting it flow naturally. As the notes filled the hall, she felt herself relax, the nervousness fading away. Her fingers moved with confidence, and the music began to transform. She added little flourishes, subtle shifts in rhythm, and dynamics that made the piece feel alive. The tune she had once played as a simple melody now became something more expressive, something that told a story beyond the notes. The audience responded in unexpected ways. Some leaned forward, captivated by the emotion and depth of her playing. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. For the first time, she felt a true connection with the listeners. Her doubts melted away, replaced by the joy of sharing something personal and meaningful. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, followed by applause. Not just polite claps, but heartfelt appreciation. She smiled, feeling the warmth of their recognition, but more importantly, feeling proud of herself for trusting her instincts and letting the music speak. After the performance, several people came to her, asking questions about how she learned and expressing their admiration. She answered humbly, explaining that she simply loved to play and that the music came from her heart. She realized that people weren't just impressed by technical skill, they were moved by the emotion she conveyed. It was a lesson she would carry with her forever. Music was not about perfection. It was about honesty and connection. That night, as she walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, she felt a new sense of confidence. The doubt that had plagued her before now seemed smaller, and the excitement for future performances grew. She knew there would be challenges, mistakes, and nerves, but she also knew that she had discovered something important about herself. She had learned that even in moments of uncertainty, the music could guide her, and through it, she could reach others in ways words never could. After the local competition, she felt a new sense of purpose. The experience had shown her that music was more than just playing the right notes. It was about expressing feelings and connecting with others. She spent her days experimenting with melodies, letting her fingers wander across the keys, discovering harmonies she had never noticed before. Every day at the piano was a new adventure, and she was determined to explore every possibility. She didn't rush. She allowed herself to play slowly, carefully, listening to every sound, noticing the smallest changes that could make a difference. One afternoon, while playing a soft, flowing melody, she noticed a shift in the way she approached music. Previously, she had focused on accuracy, making sure each note was correct. Now, she started paying attention to the emotion behind the notes. She imagined stories with her music, moments of happiness, sadness, and hope. Each time she played, she tried to communicate something unique, something that came straight from her heart. It wasn't about showing off or impressing anyone. It was about creating a feeling that could reach others. The realization was freeing, and it made the piano feel alive beneath her hands. She began to compose small pieces inspired by her thoughts and experiences. Sometimes she would write them down, but often she preferred to play from memory, letting the music flow naturally without interruption. Her compositions were simple yet expressive, and each one reflected a different part of her personality. Some pieces were playful, filled with quick, lively notes that made her smile as she played. Others were quiet and reflective, with long, lingering chords that carried a sense of longing. Music had become a language through which she could speak without words, and it gave her a feeling of control and freedom she had never known before. Word about her performances began to spread slowly. Friends and neighbors who had heard her at the recital or the competition often encouraged her to play again. Their praise was kind, but it wasn't what motivated her. What mattered most was the feeling she experienced when the music flowed from her fingertips. It was a private joy, a connection with herself and the piano, that no one else could take away. Still, she started to consider performing again in front of a larger audience. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. She knew that with more listeners came greater pressure, but she also felt that she had grown enough to face it. One day, she was invited to perform at a small charity event organized by the local arts council. It wasn't a competition, and there were no prizes, only an audience eager to enjoy music. She accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to share her compositions and experiment with her playing in front of others. Over the next few days, she practiced intensely, not just the simple tune she had been asked to perform, but also a few original pieces she had created. Each piece had a story, and she thought carefully about how to convey that story through her music. On the day of the event, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves. The venue was larger than anything she had performed in before, with rows of chairs filled with people and a small stage at the front. She walked to the piano, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the bench and prepared to play. The audience was quiet, attentive, waiting for the first note. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, centering herself. She reminded herself that the music was hers to express, and the audience was there to listen, not judge. With that thought, she let her fingers touch the keys. The simple tune she started with sounded different in the larger hall. The notes echoed softly, filling the space, and she felt a sense of wonder as she played. Then, almost instinctively, she began to add her own flourishes. A small variation here, a soft chord there, and suddenly the music she had played countless times before became alive with emotion. The audience was captivated, leaning forward in their seats, drawn into the story she was telling through the piano. Her heart raced, but instead of fear, she felt exhilaration. She had discovered the joy of letting herself be carried by the music, rather than controlling it rigidly. Midway through the performance, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to imagine the music as a river, flowing freely and carrying her thoughts and feelings along with it. Each note was a drop of water, each chord a wave, and she became part of that river. Her hands moved more confidently now, expressing emotions she hadn't even realized she was feeling. The music transformed from a simple tune into a complex, moving piece that reflected her inner world. People in the audience were visibly moved, some nodding their heads, others closing their eyes, completely absorbed in the performance. She remembered her grandfather's words, "Play from your heart, not from the notes. They resonated deeply now. She was no longer concerned about mistakes or accuracy. She focused on conveying her emotions, letting her creativity guide her fingers. The piano responded to her touch, producing sounds that were rich and full, and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She was discovering that true music was not just about technical skill but about emotion, intention, and connection. As the performance came to an end, she added a final, lingering chord that seemed to hang in the air. There was a pause, and then the audience erupted into applause. It was louder and more enthusiastic than she had ever experienced before. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering, and some even had tears in their eyes. She felt a rush of gratitude and happiness. Not because of the applause, but because she had shared a part of herself through music, and it had been received with understanding and appreciation. Afterward, several audience members approached her, asking questions about her compositions and telling her how much they had been moved. She answered humbly, explaining that she simply loved to play and let her feelings guide her. She realized that this was the moment she had been working toward. Not recognition or fame, but the ability to connect with others through something she loved. The joy of that connection stayed with her long after the event ended. That night, as she walked home under the quiet streetlights, she reflected on how much she had grown. The nervous, uncertain girl who had played a simple tune at the community recital was no longer the same. She had learned to trust her instincts, embrace her emotions, and let her music speak for her. The journey was far from over, but she felt ready for whatever came next. Music had become more than a hobby or a skill. It was a part of who she was, a way to understand herself and the world around her, and a bridge to reach others in ways words never could. As her music continued to grow in depth and complexity, she began to notice something extraordinary happening during her performances. When she allowed herself to fully express her emotions through the piano, the audience responded in ways she had never imagined. People would lean forward, captivated by the melodies, their faces reflecting surprise, curiosity, and awe. Sometimes, she could even feel the room shifting, as if the music had created a gentle current that connected everyone present. It was no longer just about playing notes. It was about telling a story, evoking feelings, and creating a shared experience. She spent hours experimenting with her own compositions at home, often staying up late into the evening. She would play slowly, carefully listening to each note and chord, asking herself whether the music conveyed the emotion she intended. Sometimes she would replay a passage over and over, adjusting the tempo or adding subtle dynamics to bring it to life. She discovered that even the smallest changes could make a piece sound completely different. A pause, a soft chord, or a gentle rise in volume could add meaning and depth, transforming simple notes into a powerful story. Music had become her way of communicating thoughts and feelings that words could never fully express. One day, she received an invitation to perform at a regional arts showcase. It was a more formal event than she had ever attended, with professional musicians, critics, and a larger audience. At first, she felt a wave of anxiety. This was not a casual recital or a local competition. It was a chance to show her music to people who might judge it more critically. But she also felt excitement. This was an opportunity to challenge herself, to see how far she could take her music, and to share her compositions with a wider audience. She spent the following weeks preparing, refining her pieces, and adding small touches that made them uniquely her own. The day of the showcase arrived, and the hall was filled with people from all walks of life. She walked to the piano, her heart pounding but her mind focused. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that this was about expressing her music, not about winning approval. As she played the opening notes, she noticed the room fall silent, everyone listening intently. She allowed herself to be fully present in the moment, letting her emotions guide her hands. The simple tune she began with gradually transformed, evolving into a complex, flowing piece that captured the audience's attention. Midway through the performance, she reached a point where the music seemed to take on a life of its own. Her fingers moved almost instinctively, weaving together melodies, harmonies, and rhythms that she hadn't consciously planned. Each note reflected a part of her story, her emotions, and her experiences. She noticed subtle reactions in the audience, eyes widening in surprise, heads tilting in curiosity, and soft gasps of appreciation. People were not just hearing the music, they were feeling it. The room was no longer just a hall filled with listeners. It had become a space where her music connected with the hearts of everyone present. She remembered the advice her grandfather had given her years ago. Let the music speak for you. Those words guided her as she continued to play, allowing the piano to become a voice for her emotions. She experimented with volume, rhythm, and timing, adding gentle flourishes and pauses that gave her pieces more depth. The simple tune she had started with had become a canvas for her creativity, a way to convey joy, sorrow, hope, and wonder all at once. The audience could sense the honesty in her playing, the genuine emotion behind every note, and it made them lean in closer, captivated by her performance. As the music swelled, she felt a surge of energy and confidence. Her nerves faded, replaced by a sense of connection with the listeners. She could feel the room vibrating with emotion, and it was a thrilling sensation. Each chord seemed to echo in the hearts of those listening, creating a shared experience that was both powerful and intimate. She realized that her music had the ability to touch people in ways words never could, and that thought filled her with a profound sense of purpose. When she reached the final section of her performance, she allowed herself to play freely, letting the music carry her. She added subtle variations, held notes a little longer than usual, and emphasized the emotional peaks of the piece. The audience responded with visible amazement, some nodding along, others closing their eyes, completely absorbed in the experience. The room seemed to hold its breath as she delivered the final chord, letting it linger in the air before releasing it into silence. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of her own breathing and the quiet tension of the audience. Then the applause began. It started softly, as a few people clapped in appreciation, but it quickly grew louder and stronger, filling the hall with a wave of sound. She looked up and saw the faces of the audience, smiling, teary-eyed, and moved by the performance. People were standing, cheering, and some even called out words of encouragement. She felt a mix of relief, joy, and pride, not because she had received recognition, but because she had succeeded in sharing her music in a way that truly touched others. It was a validation of the countless hours she had spent practicing, experimenting, and learning to trust her instincts. After the performance, several attendees approached her to express their admiration and ask about her techniques and inspirations. She spoke humbly, explaining that she simply followed her emotions and allowed the music to guide her hands. She realized that her journey was not just about becoming a skilled pianist. It was about learning to communicate through her music, to connect with others, and to express herself authentically. That night, as she walked home, she felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything she had experienced before. The experience had shown her the power of music and the importance of trusting herself. Over the following days, she reflected on the showcase and the reactions she had received. She realized that her performances had begun to take on a life of their own, transcending simple notes and melodies. Music had become a way for her to share her inner world, to evoke emotions, and to create connections with people she had never met. She felt inspired to continue exploring her talents, to compose new pieces, and to find ways to share her music more widely. The journey was just beginning, and she knew that with each performance, she would continue to grow, both as a musician and as a person. Her confidence had grown, but so had her understanding of responsibility. She realized that the gift of music was not just about personal satisfaction. It was about the impact she could have on others. Every note she played had the potential to inspire, comfort, or uplift someone listening. That thought motivated her to practice with intention, to explore the depth of her abilities, and to embrace every opportunity to perform. She no longer feared judgment or mistakes. She focused on authenticity, emotion, and connection, knowing that those qualities were what truly mattered in music. With each new day, she continued to develop her style, blending technical skill with heartfelt expression. She experimented with different genres, tempos, and harmonies, always seeking to create pieces that resonated emotionally. The simple tune she had once been asked to play had evolved into a symbol of her growth and creativity, a reminder that even the smallest opportunities could lead to remarkable achievements when approached with passion and sincerity. And as she looked ahead, she felt a quiet confidence that her music would continue to touch hearts, inspire others, and carry her on a journey that was far from over. Her reputation began to grow quietly, almost like a gentle ripple spreading across a calm lake. People who had attended her performances told friends, and word of her extraordinary ability reached the ears of local musicians and teachers. Despite the attention, she remained humble, focused more on her love for the piano than on recognition. She continued to practice daily, not out of obligation, but because the music had become a part of her life, a source of joy and comfort that she could not imagine living without. Each day she played, she discovered new possibilities, new expressions, and new ways to touch the hearts of those who listened. One afternoon, she was approached by a local arts coordinator who invited her to perform at a larger cultural event. The venue was bigger than any she had experienced before, filled with an audience of strangers and people who had heard of her only by reputation. She felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This was different from her previous performances. The stakes felt higher, and the idea of performing in front of so many people was daunting. Yet, there was also a sense of thrill, an opportunity to see how far she could push herself and her music. She knew that this was a chance to take her abilities to a new level, to truly share her gift with a larger community. In the days leading up to the event, she dedicated herself to preparation. She selected a mix of pieces, some familiar and some her own compositions, carefully considering how to convey emotion and tell a story through each performance. She practiced for hours, focusing not just on technique but on the feeling behind each note. She experimented with dynamics, timing, and tempo, adding subtle touches that made her music more expressive and compelling. Every evening, she would sit at the piano and play until her fingers ached, immersed in the world of sound and emotion. It was exhausting at times, but the joy of discovering something new in the music kept her going. On the day of the event, she arrived early, taking time to observe the stage and the audience seating. The hall was large, with polished wooden floors and high ceilings that amplified sound beautifully. She felt a flutter of nerves but reminded herself that the music belonged to her, and she could let it flow naturally. As she walked onto the stage and approached the grand piano, she felt the familiar weight of anticipation mixed with excitement. She adjusted the bench, took a deep breath, and let her hands rest lightly on the keys. The performance began with a simple melody, soft and unassuming, but as she played, it started to transform. Her fingers moved with grace and confidence, weaving the tune into something more expressive, more alive. She added small variations, gentle flourishes, and subtle changes in rhythm, allowing the music to flow naturally and tell a story of its own. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the shift from a simple tune to a dynamic, emotionally charged piece. She could feel the energy in the room, the way the listeners were drawn into her performance, and it inspired her to play with even more freedom and expression. Midway through her set, she reached a point where the music seemed to take over, guiding her hands across the keys in a way that felt almost magical. She closed her eyes, letting her emotions flow into the piano. Each chord, each note, carried a piece of her heart, and the audience responded intuitively. She noticed faces in the crowd showing wonder, awe, and even tears. People were moved by something deeper than technical skill. They were feeling the emotions she poured into the music. It was a profound realization that her talent was not just about playing notes but about creating a connection, a shared experience that transcended words. As the performance continued, she felt a sense of liberation she had never experienced before. She experimented with tempo and dynamics, adding crescendos and pauses that gave the music a life of its own. The simple melody she had once been asked to play evolved into a rich tapestry of sound, filled with depth and emotion. The audience could sense her sincerity, the authenticity of her performance, and it made them more engaged and responsive. Every glance, Every movement of the listener seemed to feed back into her playing, creating a dialogue without words, a silent understanding between her and the people watching. She remembered the long hours of practice, the times she doubted herself, and the quiet moments of discovery at the piano. All of it had led to this moment, where she could fully express herself and be understood without speaking a single word. The music had become a voice for her emotions, a way to share her experiences, hopes, and dreams. She realized that the power of her talent was not just in technical proficiency but in the ability to convey meaning and touch hearts. Each performance became a journey, a story that unfolded with every note, and she reveled in the joy of creating that experience. As she approached the final section of her performance, she felt a surge of energy and focus. Her hands moved swiftly yet gracefully across the keys, bringing together all the melodies and themes she had explored. The audience was fully absorbed, some holding their breath, others swaying gently with the music. She added subtle nuances, emphasizing emotion and drama, making the piece feel alive and spontaneous. It was a culmination of her growth, her dedication, and her willingness to trust her instincts. The music had reached a point where it was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone in the room, a shared moment of beauty and emotion. When the final note lingered in the hall and faded into silence, there was a moment of stunned quiet. Then the applause began. It was thunderous, spontaneous, and heartfelt, filling the space with sound and energy. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and some even calling out words of admiration. She felt a mixture of relief, pride, and overwhelming joy, not because of the recognition, but because she had succeeded in sharing a part of herself through her music, and it had been received with understanding and appreciation. She had transformed a simple tune into an experience that touched the hearts of those listening, and that realization filled her with a deep sense of fulfillment. After the performance, people approached her to compliment her playing and to ask about her compositions and techniques. She answered humbly, explaining that she simply played what she felt and allowed the music to guide her. She understood that her journey was about more than recognition. It was about growth, self-expression, and connection. Each audience member who had been moved by her performance became a part of her story, and she felt grateful for the opportunity to share her gift. That night, as she walked home, the echoes of the music and the warmth of the audience's response stayed with her, a reminder that her dedication and passion had led to something extraordinary. Over the following weeks, she continued to explore her music, experimenting with new compositions and refining her technique. She felt more confident in her abilities and more aware of the responsibility that came with her talent. Music was not just a personal joy. It was a way to impact others, to inspire and move people through emotion. She practiced with intention, focusing on authenticity and expression rather than perfection. Each day, she discovered new possibilities, and each performance became an opportunity to grow and connect. The journey was far from over, but she felt ready to face the challenges and embrace the opportunities that lay ahead. Her music had become more than notes on a page. It was a voice, a story, and a bridge to reach others in ways that words alone could never achieve. The months that followed her big performance were filled with new experiences and opportunities. She continued to play every day, but now with a deeper understanding of herself and the power of her music. Each practice session became a conversation with the piano, a way to explore her emotions and share them in the most authentic way possible. She experimented with melodies, harmonies, and rhythms, always seeking to make the music feel alive and meaningful. Her confidence had grown, but it was a quiet, steady confidence rooted in the knowledge that she had the ability to touch hearts through her talent. She began to receive invitations to perform at schools, community events, and local concerts. Each time, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The larger the audience, the greater the challenge, but she had learned to channel her nerves into energy, letting it enhance her playing rather than hinder it. With every performance, she discovered something new about herself and her music. She noticed how subtle changes in tempo or dynamics could create completely different emotions in the listeners. She realized that music was not just about technique but about understanding the people listening and communicating with them through sound. One afternoon, she was approached by a music teacher from a nearby city who had heard about her performances. The teacher invited her to attend masterclasses and workshops, promising to help her develop her skills even further. At first, she hesitated. The thought of traveling and learning in new environments was intimidating. But the idea of growing as a musician and exploring her potential excited her. She accepted the opportunity, eager to learn from experienced mentors and gain new perspectives on music. The workshops were intense, filled with long hours of practice, instruction, and performance. But she embraced every moment. She learned new techniques, gained confidence in her improvisation, and began to understand the nuances that distinguished a good musician from an exceptional one. As she continued to perform and study, her music began to attract attention beyond her local community. Videos of her performances were shared online, and she began to receive messages from people expressing how moved they were by her playing. Some wrote about how her music had inspired them, brought them comfort, or encouraged them to pursue their own passions. She was humbled and grateful for the response, but she remained grounded, focused on the joy of creating music and the connections it fostered. Each message reminded her that her gift could reach far beyond the walls of a concert hall, touching people in ways she had never imagined. Despite the growing attention, she remained deeply committed to authenticity. She continued to practice with intention, listening to the emotions behind each note and letting the piano become an extension of her voice. She experimented with different styles, blending classical techniques with her own creative interpretations. She allowed herself to take risks, to play pieces that challenged her, and to explore new ideas without fear of making mistakes. Through this process, she discovered that music was not just about performing perfectly but about expressing herself fully and sharing that expression with others. One evening, she was invited to perform at a charity gala attended by prominent musicians, community leaders, and music enthusiasts. The hall was magnificent, filled with anticipation and an air of sophistication. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but she also felt a sense of readiness. She had grown so much as a musician, and she knew that her emotions and passion could carry her through any performance. As she approached the grand piano, she took a deep breath and reminded herself that she was there to share her music, not to impress anyone. That simple thought grounded her and allowed her to focus on the connection she wanted to create. The performance began with a gentle, flowing melody that captured the attention of the audience immediately. She let the music build naturally, weaving in harmonies and subtle flourishes that expressed joy, longing, and hope. The audience was captivated, drawn into the story she told through the piano. She closed her eyes, letting herself be carried by the music, and for the first time, she felt a profound sense of unity with everyone listening. The room seemed to breathe along with her, each note resonating with the hearts of the audience. She realized that music had the power to create shared experiences, to bring people together, and to convey emotions that words alone could never capture. Midway through her performance, she reached a section that she had improvised just moments before playing. Her hands moved with confidence, creating intricate patterns and rich textures that filled the hall. She could feel the audience leaning in, their attention fully focused on her and the music. Some had tears in their eyes, others smiled softly, and a few whispered to neighbors in awe. She was not performing for applause or recognition. She was performing to share a piece of herself, and the response was more than she had ever imagined. In that moment, she understood the true impact of her music. It was not about perfection, fame, or accolades. It was about touching the hearts of others and creating a lasting emotional connection. As the final notes lingered and faded into silence, the hall erupted in applause. The clapping was thunderous and heartfelt, filling the space with energy and appreciation. She lifted her hands from the keys, feeling a rush of relief, pride, and joy, not for herself but for the shared experience she had created, for the way the music had moved the audience, and for the realization that she had truly found her voice. People rose to their feet, cheering, and some came forward to express their admiration personally. She spoke humbly, explaining that she simply played from the heart, allowing the music to guide her. In the weeks that followed, Her life changed in subtle yet meaningful ways. She continued to perform, teach, and explore new compositions, but she also became a source of inspiration for others. Young musicians sought her advice, parents encouraged their children to listen to her performances, and community members spoke of her talent with admiration. She understood that her music had the power to inspire and uplift, and she took that responsibility seriously. Every note she played became an opportunity to bring joy, comfort, and connection to others. Through it all, she remained grounded and focused on her passion. She knew that her journey as a musician was ongoing, that there would always be new challenges, new pieces to master, and new emotions to explore. But she also knew that the essence of her talent was not in accolades or recognition. It was in the ability to express herself authentically and to share that expression with the world. Music had become more than a skill or a hobby. It was a bridge between hearts, a way to communicate emotions, and a reminder of the beauty and power of human expression. As she looked back on her journey, from playing a simple tune at a small community recital to performing in grand halls and touching the lives of countless people, she realized how much she had grown. She had learned to trust herself, embrace her emotions, and let her music speak freely. She understood the importance of dedication, practice, and courage, but she also recognized the deeper truth, that true artistry comes from authenticity, emotion, and connection. And as she continued to play, she knew that the music would always be there, guiding her, inspiring her, and allowing her to share her heart with the world.